Okay.
All right, we ready to roll?
We are live with Ellen Pitts. This is Tanasi Arts and Heritage Center. We're doing a live stream today about stained glass. We're really getting started here at about 6 p.m., but we're going to give some people a little bit of time to get on. So do you want to show off a couple things before we get started?
Just go ahead and welcome everybody. I'm Ellen Pitts and Victoria here, and I represent Tanasi Arts and Heritage Center, and I'm one of the artists with Tanasi. And I've also got a 40-year career as an art teacher. So I learned a lot of different mediums while I was teaching. But in 2000, I had a really bad time in my life. I was rather depressed, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, why don't we go take a stained glass class?" Well, I'd always loved stained glass, and I'd always been interested in it, so I thought, oh, why not? So we were living in Columbia, South Carolina at the time, and went down to the local stained glass shop and took a class, and I got hooked, and I just kept doing stained glass since the year 2000. So 20 some years later, I still like to do it. These are just some little color wheels that I use just scrap glass for, and just make sure that there's one of each color for the color wheels, and they're just real cute little freeform sun catchers that you can hang up somewhere. I also have done a lot of these little designs, which are what I call my plant buddies. I have dragonflies, ladybugs, bumblebees, and butterflies that are kind of a three-dimensional sort of thing. And some of them I put on a pole or a metal stake, really, that you can stick in the ground either outside or inside to kind of show off your plants. This would be one of them. You just take the stick and stick it in the ground, and it's very decorative and draws a lot of attention to your plants. So we're going to start by just explaining a couple things about stained glass designs. There are many companies probably out there still that make glass, make stained glass supplies, and you can find those online. Locally here in Johnson City, Hobby Lobby does have a section that sells square 1-foot pieces of glass and all the basic things that you would need to do stained glass. So if you're really interested, just go down there and look through their supplies, and you'll be able to find pretty much what you need. Some of the equipment that we have, I'll kind of explain it as we go along. The most expensive thing is what they call the grinder, the glass grinder, which you need to smooth out the edges of the glass after it's been cut. The soldering iron is also kind of a pricey item. These are special pliers and cutting tools that you need to cut the glass. This is a foiling tool, and you need foil that goes around the glass like this before it gets soldered. So the thing about stained glass is you're using a material that does not stick together, and you put foil around it with solder, and that holds it together. So part of the challenge in making large pieces, large pictures, or even just sometimes the smaller pieces is how to stabilize the joints where the glass and the foil are coming together. For instance, this dragonfly over here, these are fairly heavy weighted pieces of glass, and there will be a line of solder around each piece, but I'll probably end up reinforcing it with a piece of wire, possibly all the way down the body and back up, when it actually, before it's actually finished, just to kind of make sure that that joint and that wing doesn't get too heavy and fall off after a period of time. So going to a company that does stained glass or sell stained glass materials, a lot of times they will have designs for you to use. This one would be a simple picture of an iris flower, and in the design, you're going to have lines that start at an edge and go to another edge because that's stabilizing. These two lines go from one large piece of glass to another large piece of glass, and these two and this one, they're all connected, but this one is another one that kind of comes up here. It could have gone farther, but they put it in a little bit because this is stabilizing as well to have this corner here. You don't usually have a ton of smaller pieces. These corner pieces very much help stabilize by having a large piece of glass in the four corners to take the smaller pieces and just kind of hold them together. So that's one of the challenges of working with stained glass, is knowing how to make a design that's going to work for you, unless you just go ahead and get someone else's design that's already done that for you. So a second thing that's going to happen once you have a design, this was just a picture. If I want to turn this into a design, I need to choose what color glass I need for the petals, for the leaves, for the stem, for the background. I'd have to go through and decide what colors I might want to use for those various parts. Once I have the colors, this one has already been color coded. So up here, it's showing that in this design, you can get these 5 colors. They even have a code at the store for, you know, if you want that particular color, you just ask for that number. You can see that for this design here, it takes less than 1 square foot, or half of a square foot, which is a 6 by 6 inch square. So it doesn't take a lot of glass. Then we have, if you notice, the dragonfly has A on its wings. That represents one color. Each one of the letters represents a color. So in addition to this, once you actually get going on the design, you're going to be adding a number as well to each one of those pieces. You wouldn't necessarily need to know what color it is, unless you think you're going to forget. I mean, obviously, these are going to be the same color. These are all the same color. If you had 2 different colors of green, then you might have a D and a G for the 2 different colors. So then we have, I wanted to mention this. When you cut glass, you cut usually curves, and there's only so much of a curve you can cut. You cannot actually cut very well a circle, hand cut. Now you can use tools to sometimes do that, but hand cutting with this tool right here, which is your glass cutter, does not work very well to try to make a complete circle. Or sometimes even very tight partial circles or curves that are tight. So noticing here with the stars how these have a curve to them, this allows the curve to be made with a glass cutter. If you needed to have that be an angle, more like this, has a very sharp angle to it, you could start in the center and make a line that goes to each one of the 5 star points, and that would give you a different kind of a configuration. And you could also break it up into smaller pieces so that there were straight lines to achieve that angle inside that space. So sometimes you have to arrange your piece or change what you've designed in order to accommodate the availability of the cutter and the glass being cut to those sizes and shapes. So that's just a caution in case anybody wants to start drawing. Just know that there are certain things you're going to be able to do with a cutter and certain things you won't be able to do with a cutter. So these are cutting tools. Once you have your design, and this is our design, we're going to make a bluebird of happiness tonight, hopefully. And you can see I've numbered the pieces. Piece number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are up here in red, so I would be sure to note that they were smaller and needed to be cut as well. So I have 2 colors of glass. One is blue, and then I have a brownish piece for the chest of the bird, and then I have 2 yellow pieces for the beak. I also wanted to show you this. This was another bluebird that I've already kind of got started. And while I was cutting that piece, unbeknownst to me, it didn't cut this curve. I'll try to put it out here again. So as I was taking the cutter here, it kind of stopped, and I went out that way, but it wouldn't let me do that tight of a curve. And when I tried to break the glass, it didn't run the way I wanted it to, and it ended up breaking. So I now have to recut this piece in order to finish that bird. So I chose another piece of glass, and we're going to go ahead and cut these for you so you can see how that kind of works. And hopefully we won't have any more mess ups, but you have to know that that's part of the process. I will also say, if you're afraid of blood, do not do stained glass, because you're going to get cut eventually. So when you do your design, you cut up one of the designs, you make a copy, you cut one apart, and you glue each one of your pieces to the glass. And then we're going to take them and cut them out. So this has a little wheel right there against my finger. It also has a hollow stem, and you unscrew this and you put oil in there, and the oil comes out to lubricate the blade. So this is going to make a sound. It's very faint sound. I heard it. It's kind of like a scratching sound. This is a tool that puts pressure kind of away, downward on each side of that line. So when I get there we go. So I could hear that the cutter was cutting. It's like I said, it's kind of a scratchy little sound. And once the glass is cut and has been scratched like that, it tends to do what we call run, and it'll just follow the line. So I'm using my that one had a pretty good sound to it, if y'all heard it. It's not very loud, but it's essential that you do hear it. And we got one more cut. So this is the one that messed up for me last time, so I'm going to turn it over. And let's see if I can do a better job. I'm going to be hopeful. There we go. All right, so that one turned out a lot better, so I'm going to put that one over there. So when I usually do this, I'm going to start here rather than try to start anyplace else. I'm just going to start here and separate this piece from that piece by just taking the cutter . Hopefully it's going to break. Yeah. All right. There we go. All right. Let's see if I can. Okay, break for me. There we go. So we have to kind of just take it off piece by piece by piece. You can't just start one place and go around. It doesn't usually work that way. And you also need to know when to not force it, because the next thing you're going to do is grind it. So this, I'm just going to grind that off if it's going to be giving me grief. And I'll just try to cut off that little end there for now, and knowing that when I take it to the grinder, I can get a little closer to my piece of paper. So you get to challenge yourself and let's see. And every glass is, a lot of times it's different. Some glass will have bumps in it. Now again, I can try to cut that off, but it's not worth it to me when I know I can put it in the grinder and after about 30 seconds it'll be gone anyway. So you want to try to get as close as you can to the way the configuration of the piece is, but if you can't, you can't. And sometimes it's just not worth it to try to do it. And this one doesn't really have too much of anything to cut off, so I'm not even going to bother trying to do that one or these two. I'll just let the grinder take care of getting those down to the paper. This one, on the other hand, needs to be divided, and because I have a straight edge right there, I'm going to go with that one first and divide the piece up, and then come back and take off a little more. There we go. So I still have 3 more. And like I said, it's just, these were pieces that were all scraps. And you would probably want to be conservative even if you were, starting with a whole new piece and a whole new piece of glass. The glass is fairly expensive, so everything about stained glass is pretty much expensive. So you learn to take care of your tools, and you learn to be conservative with your glass. Over here behind me, I have these white tubs, and there's probably, in this little pile of scraps here, I would keep that one out. The rest of them I will throw away. But the scraps come in handy when you're trying to do small pieces. Alright, so we have 2 more, but since we already have 1 bluebird, I'll just keep those for right there. Alright, let me pick up the pieces here and get them out of the way so we don't have any chance of anybody getting cut. Go ahead and pitch that out. These are my best friends, and I use them all the time. Anytime I've been working with the glass in a space, I usually brush because there are small little shards that can get all over. And I have cut myself more than one time on small pieces as well as big pieces. Alright, so that's pretty much all we've got for cutting. So now we're going to drag the grinder out. The grinder has a water bath inside and sponge that escaped. It has a safety glass here on top. So I normally don't wear my safety glasses because I'm always on the other side of my shield here. When I start grinding, it's going to make some noise, of course, because there's a motor. And the paper is going to get wet because the wheel is in water and it's throwing water out. And the purpose of the grinder is to take and smooth out all of the side of the glass all the way around and to shape the glass so that it is in the configuration of your pattern. But in the process, it will happen that this piece of paper is going to get soaked with water, and it will probably tend to just come off, and I'll have to show you how we deal with that. I've gotten to the point where I don't know if it's just because I'm an artist or whatever, I can usually remember approximately how much I have to take off. And you also have your pattern over here, which will help you because you're going to lay it on top of that pattern, and hopefully it's going to match. So hopefully we won't be too loud. He wasn't throwing out enough water. Okay, hopefully that's going to be better. Don't want to burn up my motor. All right, so let's go. There we go. All right, I usually will take my finger and I can feel right there, there's a little bit of a point. So that one. So again. There's still a little bit of a rough edge right there. Alright, so that should work for piece number one. So then I put that, I usually try to take off as much water as I can. and lay it on top of my pattern, and then I go to another piece. So dry that one off. And when I lay it down, I want to kind of mostly see how it interacts with the other piece that I just did. So as long as it's kind of sitting on top where it needs to be, and I'm thinking ahead to the step of soldering and making sure that those two are going to lay side by side. So I'm thinking that I may want to take off a little bit right on there on that wing, just kind of flatten it out a little. So that it just kind of lays up against that other piece a little bit tighter than it was before. And it's really not important to have the paper stay on at this point, but I'll keep it on for right now. So then we have two more key pieces. Piece number 6 and piece number 5 have to fit in there pretty close to where those other ones are. It's got just enough room to get in there. So that one's got to go in there. And we'll go ahead and fit that one because I didn't cut the tail. And we can go with this one too. Let's go do this one first. Now this one has magic marker on it to try to define the line. So this one is going in here. And this is kind of going to be a constant thing now. I'm going to have to keep redrawing that line some. So, because the water is going to keep taking it off. This is kind of where visual memory can help a lot. So if you can imagine a big, large piece that has 200 smaller pieces involved in it, to try to get all the pieces to fit together, is tedious. It takes kind of a long time sometimes to make sure that all the pieces are fitting together. So the design is part of it, and the cutting is part of it, and the grinding is part of it. But they're all very important parts. All right. So now I've noticed that I've actually got a piece I can actually cut off. I'll go back to my cutting tool. Yeah. I need to get a new blade for my cutter. Dude. This glass is a lot thicker than the other one was, which is part of it, and it's got a wave in it. All right, cut off, cut off. There we go. Alright, so a little bit more to take off. So now it's just straight. So I can live with that. Alright. So now he'll be ready to foil, and nope, got one little spot. So there's a big gap right in here. And I'm going to take out just a tiny bit of glass right there. So I'm going to mark it right there just to let me know that I just want to take off a little tiny bit in that area to try to get those two pieces to get a little closer. There we go. All right, so there's our bird. All right, how are we doing on time?
We're good. 6:30.
So we still have a whole hour. All right, we're good. So let's go ahead and do a couple more of these, because I did want to show everybody about how to do the soldering, and I gotta have pieces to I will say I did some grinding the last couple of days, and because the water gets on your fingers, it softens up your skin, and the glass tends to cut your fingers up a little bit. Alright, so my fingers have not been doing this for a while, so they're kind of hurting a little bit. You have to put a fair amount of pressure against the grinder in order for the grinder to work well. So when your fingers get soft with the water and the glass is kind of sharp on the edges. Alright, so we've still got there's a little that needs to come off in order for those two pieces to fit up close to each other. Take a little bit off another side. Alright, Alright, so I took the paper off so you can see that those pieces are starting to look a little bit better. I don't like the fact that this line isn't coming together to make it look as much like a bird as I'd like. So I am going to take this piece and shave off a little bit more. There we go. That looks a little better. Alright, now we need a tail. So we're back to cutting. Come on. Don't make me do everything on the grinder. Just great. Okay. Alright, chances of me getting this done. Alright, now this is an angle that is not going to happen with the cutters. So I can come in and do a line that's just curved like that. And hopefully the grinder can get in there enough to make it enough of an angle to blend. I also have to remember that the solder will take up a little bit of room in the seams between the pieces of glass. So grind this one. Now there would also be another solution to this, and partly I have done that. Come here. These two pieces actually can fit in there side by side. I made the beak in two pieces. So when I grind off these, they'll fit inside that space a little bit easier. So a lot of times it's working with your design and your equipment to get the best outcome that you can. So, all right. What's our time look like?
6:43.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and go on to the foiling part so I can show it. So time to do some solder. All righty. So the next step in getting a piece of glass made is to do what we call foiling. So stained glass used to use a process where they would put what they call a lead came, which was like a slotted piece of lead around the outside of the glass. And the trouble was, as we know, lead is poisonous, and especially fumes or inhaling it or ingesting it, like with lead paint, was not a good idea. So they stopped doing as much lead, and for most people that do it as a hobby, they came up with the copper foil method. Copper allows for solder to hold on to it, and again, solder is what's holding a piece together. So we need to put a piece of copper foil on all the pieces of glass that you're going to solder. The copper foil is sticky on one side, and I pull off a little bit. And then it's important, if you take a look at this piece, it should be even. This side and this side should have about the same amount of foil showing. It shouldn't be real close to the edge. Should be a little bit of overlap on each side, which is easier said than done when you're trying to do this. So what I've found is I look at it from a distance and get my finger to line up with the glass and just push the tab, the end of the foil on there. Then I use my index finger and I put pressure and roll the glass, keeping it exactly visually in the middle to the best of my ability. This is tricky. It's not devastating if you get it on there, and I usually will not push any of it down until I'm pretty sure, and I'm checking as I go. So I've just checked everything that I've done to see if I can still see that little bit of a lip of foil on it as I go around. And it isn't hard, but there's no real fast way, I don't think, to do this. And I just want to overlap it a little bit, and then I cut it off. And then I take my fingers and I push against it evenly on both sides, little by little, and work my way around the piece by just doing that with my fingers first. And then we take our foiling tool, and it's slotted here. This is meant to squeeze, so you can see that the end kind of closes together. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to push it and squeeze, and this should tighten it all up. I'm putting pressure downward and against my fingers as I'm squeezing that tool together, so that we get a real tight seal on the foil against the glass. And then I look at it to make sure that it does look pretty good. And if I see anything that's bad or not working, I can always take it off. This is also a burnisher, which means that I can take it and I rub this along the edge. I can also take the flat side, there's a flat side right there, and I can push down and smooth out anything that's not right. And as I'm doing this, I'm looking and I see a spot that I don't like, and I will explain that in just a minute and show you how we're going to fix it. So this piece is going to go this side up right there, which is good because that way I don't really have to fix what I saw because it was on the other side. But stained glass sometimes doesn't really have a front and a back. But what I saw was right here. It's kind of hard to see. It's just at the end of my fingertip. It's like that doesn't really meet, and I'm not going to get all crazy about it. But if there was a place that really wasn't too good, I could put an extra small piece of tape over something like that to kind of make it look a little more even all the way around. So now that bird's ready to solder, and this is ready to solder. So we do have two pieces that are ready to solder, but I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit more on the foiling part, because just seeing it once probably isn't enough. We also have alcohol in this container, which I usually use to clean off the glass prior to foiling. The glass grinder, a lot of times will leave a little bit of a powder of ground glass. It's just a good way to keep your glass clean. So we'll clean these off. Alright, so let's do a few more pieces of foil. So again, I get it started right in the middle, and then roll. So I'm pressing upward with my index finger and rolling the tape hopefully right down the center of the piece. And if you ever, go to a stained glass class or whatever and say, oh yeah, I remember watching this lady do this, it isn't really that hard, but it does take a lot of practice to be able to do it without having to stop and adjust and redo and what have you. So the more that you practice anything, the better you get at it. I always used to tell my students. So now we're going to take my finger, my thumb and my finger, and press away so that I'm trying to take that and evenly press it down against the sides of the glass before I take the tool. And we take the foiling tool, grab. You can kind of see a difference usually about how much smoother it gets once you've used the tool on it. And I like to just take this and reinforce anything I see that doesn't look really good. I was kind of surprised after not having done this for a long time that I still had the ability to do it without too many problems. All right, so one more time. Each piece of glass, I'm trying to think how many steps that I've counted that it goes through from the drawing. It's about 10 steps that each piece of glass goes through before it's finished. Which is a lot when you think about the time that's involved. Most of the older, let's see, I was talking instead of paying attention. So I don't know if you can see this. This is kind of a little off center, so I'm going to pull this up and bring it back down. Most of our older crafts are being lost. Not that many people are doing it. Stained glass is one. Making brooms. People that do blacksmithing. Trying to think of other things that are some of our older, even quilting. All of these were done by our ancestors out of necessity, and now that we have box stores and we have production companies and we have manufacturers that have big machines that make stuff for people, this kind of handmade creations are not as appreciated, I guess you might say, and are not as readily available. And it's kind of funny because when you think about each one of these pieces of glass going through 10 steps, and even if each step, I mean, I haven't been keeping track about how long it takes to put a piece of foil on a piece of glass, and of course it depends on how big the piece of glass is and probably a few other things, but you can see that we've been at this for a good hour about, and we don't have our piece made just yet, but the one bird here has got 5 pieces to it, and each one of those pieces going through about 10 steps before it's all done. That means that, let's just say you spend a minute on each one of those steps. That's 10 minutes a piece. So at very minimum, and that doesn't include the drawing part or the copying part or the cutting the pattern part. There was a lot of parts that were behind the scenes that we didn't time, but were still important to the actual outcome of making this one little bird here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces times 10 steps times a minute, which is pretty fast. That's not quite an hour, and we haven't even slaughtered yet. So if you think about how much somebody would want to purchase that for, and when you put your time into it, that's when I have a problem, because it's like there's, time is valuable to me too. So I hate that our crafts are being not done as much by people, but I also understand that economically, when people are trying to make a living, it's going to be hard to make a living doing those kinds of things now. So next time you go to the store or go to a gallery and you see things that are handmade, just know that they were made because that person had a desire to probably keep that craft alive. And I love doing this. I find it very soothing and therapeutic. I find it nice to be able to take pieces of glass that have no relationship to each other and turn them into a work of art that someone can take home and enjoy. So part of us people that do these kinds of things. We do it for the love of the craft. So, alright, foiling tool. And my soldering iron is hot, so our last step is going to be to solder. It is also one of the more tedious steps, can be anyway. It doesn't always have to be. So we have part of the bird. We're missing 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. All right, so we will call foiling over for now. We still have a few more pieces to foil for that one bird. But we will move on to the game of solder. Alright, so we're going to take our alcohol, take this, and we have to stand up solder. Alright, there's stuff called flux. And flux is what makes the solder move, run, melt, however you want to call it. Get this stuff out of the way here. Alright, so this is our flux, which is what's in that little container there. These are rolls of solder. This is my soldering iron. This is my ammonia block, which cleans off my soldering iron. And when we did this before, the smoke alarm went off, so it doesn't go off again. Smoke go that way. Alright. Alright, it's nice and silver now. So he's good to go. Alright, so I have my alcohol. This is flux remover in here. So in case I need to take the flux off of a piece, I can do that. We always wear gloves when we're soldering. The soldering iron is hot. Alright, so we're going to take our little bird here. I'm going to lay him out on the soldering board where he needs to be. And all his pieces where they need to be. Alright. Then we're going to take some flux. And I'm just going to put 3 or 4 little spots right now. Just because I want to drop a couple of drops. At a couple places just to kind of hold things together. Okay. Alright. So now I'm going to kind of paint the flux on these seams. People come up with all kinds of different ways to hold what they want to do. So the idea is to try to get the solder to run on the lines. down to do this so I can see better. All right. So if there's not enough flux, and sometimes you have to reapply it, the solder is not going to run and beat up. All right. Now, those are the seams, and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to put flux on this side, on those seams, and just make sure I have a good seam on both sides before we go to what they call the outside work. Didn't mean for that to happen. Okay. And we want to make sure that we're letting things cool because you don't want to pick it up when it's hot. Alright. So now this is more tedious. If you were going to make a piece that is more like a picture in a frame, then you don't do this step. This is putting solder on the outside of the object, and it's done kind of little by little. And it doesn't take long for it to stop running and get hard again. That we want to put some solder on the outside of the whole bird. So you're actually using your tools like a there's a whole bunch of solder that was there that was not necessary, so we just let it drop down to the board. Just going to kind of slowly move our way around. There's a big hunk right there on top of his beak. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure we have enough flux on that. So see how that just flattened right out. I'm going to pick up a little bit of solder. That's why you wear gloves. Otherwise that solder goes right on you. So now I have to take this off. So we try to even out the solder so that it's like a bead, and to just continue to do that all the way around. I noticed that on his beak, particularly, it's copper foil has not been covered completely. So we just tapped a little bit on there. Okay, we had to add just a little bit so that the copper wasn't showing anymore. And put a little bit more flux on his head. And then we're just going to continue to go around little by little. Okay, I noticed another spot that's not been covered there. Alright, again, if you don't have flux, it's not going to work. So, okay. Okay, there's a couple little spots on his head that still have copper showing. So we're trying to make it smooth, which is another thing that we'll do in just a minute. After we get the whole thing covered, I usually take my bare hand, take my glove off, make sure that the piece is not real hot, and I will check to make sure that there are no sharp edges from the flux anywhere. So basically the flux is nothing more than liquid metal that will get hardened as soon as it cools down. trying to get things even is a challenge. And when the solder drops and sticks in different places, you got to go back and it's constantly monitoring what you've done and looking to see what still needs to get worked on. Okay, a little bit more of this. Okay. Flux is kind of a messy substance when you get it on your fingers and everything, so I try not to handle it when it's got flux all over it. So I kind of clean it all off before I do a check. Ooh, that's still hot. So, there's our little bluebird. There he goes. Doesn't look too bad. So, now I'm going to take my fingers and look at some of the places that I think I can fix up a little bit. Some places I'm not happy with. Doing the solder is probably the hardest step, I think. I spend more time trying to make the solder look good than just about anything. So right there is a place that needs to get more solder because the copper's showing through, and right there. This is not really a bead, so that needs to have a little more heat on it so that it can bead up. This has got a little bit too much solder, so I need to even that out a little bit. So basically what I will probably do, which is what I normally do, is as I'm looking and seeing what needs to be done, I'm also saying to myself, okay, I'm just going to go over the whole thing one more time and try to even out all the places with the solder that, I see that need to be worked on in some way. Hopefully, just going through it one more time will probably get it done since this piece isn't that big. I don't know if Victoria has any questions. It's kind of hard to know if anybody out there in technology land is...
Yeah, if anybody has questions, ask them here in the chat, and I'm watching. We can ask questions.
So...
What is the purpose of the copper?
Oh,
like
good
since you
question.
you have to use the solder.
Yeah. The copper allows the glass to have a vehicle to transfer to the solder. You can't just put the solder on the glass. It will not stick. So in effect, the solder is the glue that holds the glass together. It's kind of like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You have to have the bread on the outside to hold the peanut butter and the jelly. So the solder or the copper just becomes that vehicle that allows the solder to have something to stick to and will also stick to the glass. So it's just the sandwich, the inner part of the what holds the whole thing together.
Okay.
So it just helps to transfer.
So it would just not even stay on the glass at all without the copper.
No. I can put a blob of solder right there, and it won't do anything. I'll just pick it up.
Yeah.
And
It's
take
beautiful.
it away. So. But that was a good question. The bigger the pieces are, I didn't talk about this really. We talked a little bit about reinforcing things, like the little dragonfly over there. I will probably use some wire to do some reinforcement for the support of those beads on the body, because they're kind of heavy. But in a big piece, a lot of times copper wire is inserted along a run line of, like right here. You would want to insert a copper wire in between the two pieces of glass to reinforce, to just give more strength to that joint. But we're talking about big pieces of glass and big pictures. You don't need to do that for little pieces like this. So right now, like I said, I'm just kind of doing some finish spotting to make sure that the solder is more like in a bead.
And like, what are the ways that you use stained glass? Like, what do you normally just make, like because I think I've seen some of your work and you make kind of like a whole sheet sometimes, but these are like kind of standalone.
Yeah, these are
pieces.
These are little what they call sun catchers. They're meant to like stick in a window or some sunny place. I could very easily put the bluebirds on a stick, on a stake, stiff piece of copper wire or something, so that they could be put in with a plant. Again, the copper allows me to more or less glue with the use of the solder. I can glue a stake to the piece,
right?
So that could happen. I tend to like doing what they call panels, which are pictures. They are, of course, a lot more time consuming than the little pieces. The trouble is, when you're doing them, that's not a problem. When you've got them done, if you don't have some place to put them up and hang them in your own house, or you don't have a person that you're going to gift it to, you've got to store it. You've got to have some place to put it. If you put it, like I do have a couple pieces. I have a couple pieces that I've been working on that I'm going to take down to the gallery and go ahead and hang. But they tend to be pricey objects, so stockpiling them just doesn't kind of work too well. So there's a couple things I can do with this. Like I said, I can put it on a stake. I could put a ring on it. I'll have to look for a ring. I can put a ring on the top, like a jewelry ring, like this. This is just a real, just heart-shaped stone that I didn't really have to do anything to, except I ground it down to allow the foil to be put around it, and then we put the solder on it with a ring, and now somebody can put that on a chain and have like a heart necklace. So this piece, the little bird, I can put a ring on it, and it can be hung in a window somewhere. But I do like to do the panels. Those are my favorite things. I have lots of designs for panels. I like to do commissioned work. That would be my favorite thing to do, would be to have somebody say, I want you to make a picture of, you know, my garden, or a particular flower, or a particular bird, or just about anything. I've never really come up with anything I don't think that you can't do with glass. I mean, if you can think of a picture, you can make it out of glass just like you can just about anything else. There are beautiful stained glass pieces that are done of just about everything under the sun. So like I said, I think we'll call him pretty much done. I keep finding little places. It's a constant challenge. Okay.
All right, let's do one more time. And I guess say one more time where you got the glass, and if somebody wanted to get this equipment.
Okay. Here in Johnson City area, the only place that I know of to get stained glass materials is Hobby Lobby. If you can find a stained glass shop that actually makes stained glass, they can probably procure things for you. But those kinds of shops are really becoming very far and few between. So I would say go online and look for stained glass supplies online, and you'll probably get led to a lot of the companies that make glass, and they will a lot of times sell you a box of glass that's just a varied box of glass. They'll have like anywhere from 10 sheets, 20 sheets, sometimes more than that. And that's enough to get started with. This is my supply of glass right here. And I've got sheets of just various colors and things, so that I'm pretty much equipped to do just about anything to start with. And I've also become very fond of doing things with geodes. So I do so this would be like a small piece that I would add on to the outside of this, possibly, or just put a ring on it, or possibly put a piece of cane around it to just kind of hold it together. But this started out with a geode, and then I used glass dots. I also have seashells. We can make one that has a seashell inside. I like doing these freeform kinds of things. I kind of just create as I go. Like I said, using geodes and the combination of the circles and whatever, I just create as I kind of go along. I don't actually have a plan sometimes.
Nice.
These are little, like, flowers that could go on a stake. These also have been necklaces. I just need to put a ring on it, and it's a necklace, a flower necklace. This is a different kind of design for the dragonfly. Again, I can put a stake right there, or I can put a ring right here, and they can fly around. So yeah, there's lots of things. I mean, it's pretty much limitless, and it's interesting, and it's not dangerous. It's not that hard to do. It does take some practice. But yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ellen. Do you have anything else you want to share?
So we're glad everybody joined us for our Tanasi event tonight. We would love it for people to come out and visit our gallery and come to our events. And if you're interested, maybe volunteer to be on our board or help with an event if you want to get to know some ins and outs and artists and things. We've got lots of things planned for the next few months, and we're glad everybody joined us tonight for what we were doing.
Absolutely. All right. Night. Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.